Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Hello everybody, welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we shall be analyzing the Hindu newspaper dated 22nd of May of the New Delhi edition. The topics to be discussed today have been presented on the screen. Timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. Let us begin our today's discussion. Are you confused as to which optional subject to choose? How to find the best teachers and academic support for your optional papers? And above all, how to prepare for the same during these difficult times? Rouse IS has the best solution for your optional subject related problems. We are conducting the optional orientation sessions on 22nd and 29th of May 2021, in which you can learn from the Rouse IS teachers about how to prepare for the optional subjects and how we are going to help you in scoring your best in the mains examination. The optional batches are starting from 4th June and 5th July 2021 via the online classes. Please do consider this as a call to all those who wish to completely cover the optional subject by December 2021. This will ensure the timely coverage of the optional subject, and then you can focus your attention completely on prelims either from Jan or February 2022. Rouse IS is offering guidance for political science, public administration, history, sociology, geography, economics and psychology from Delhi, Jaipur and Bangalore centers. In the description of this video, there is a link which you can use to register yourself for the orientation for the respective optional session. Please do join the orientation and kickstart your mains optional subject preparation from the team of best teachers in the civil service test preparation. All the best. The first article appears on page number 14. The article is titled as "The Reserve Bank of India to pay 99,000 crore surplus to the center." The article which we are going to discuss here shall be important mainly with respect to the prelims examination, and this article is important from the perspective of Indian economy. See, the Reserve Bank of India is a statutory body set up under the RBI Act 1934. Section 47 of the RBI Act stipulates that whatever profits the RBI earns, a certain part of these profits should be transferred in the form of dividend to the central government at the end of every financial year. For this financial year, the central government had expected that the Reserve Bank of India would transfer almost around 50,000 crore in the form of dividend. But surprisingly, the RBI has transferred almost around 99,000 crore in the form of dividend to the center. Now we all know that the finances of the central government have come under immense pressure because of the ongoing pandemic. On one hand, the overall revenues of the central government has got reduced, while the expenditure obligations on the central government has increased. So because of these two reasons, the overall fiscal deficit of the government has increased. Hence, a very important development which has taken place is now RBI has done a record transfer of 99,000 crore in the form of dividend to the center. Hence, this particular transfer from the RBI to the center would strengthen the government's finances and would help us to bring down our fiscal deficit. See, as far as your prelims examination is concerned, from this particular article, one should be aware about multiple aspects. Now, for example, in prelims 2019, we had a direct question as to which among these four is not included in the assets of a commercial bank. So basically this question required you to identify as to which of these four is an asset and which of these four is a liability. So basically you are required to understand the assets and liabilities of commercial banks in India. On similar lines, we can expect a question related to assets and liabilities of the Reserve Bank of India. Secondly, what are the different sources through which the RBI earns profits? What are the trends in the transfer of dividend from the RBI to the government? And next is a very important topic of RBI's economic capital framework, which was in news in the year 2019-20, and Bimal General Committee's recommendations on the RBI's economic capital framework. So overall, if you look at the importance which the UPSC has given to the chapter of RBI, in the previous 7 to 8 years, hardly 2 questions have been asked from the chapter of RBI. One was in prelims 2013 and the other one was in prelims 2012. But since this RBI's economic capital framework, Bimal General Committee and the transfer of dividend from the RBI was repeatedly in news from the last 1.5 to 2 years, this particular topic would become extremely important for your upcoming prelims examination. So what we will do here is, as part of this particular topic, first and foremost, we'll understand the background to this particular topic in terms of transfer of reserves and transfer of profits. We'll understand as to what are the various sources of profits for the Reserve Bank of India, what are the reserves with the RBI, the trends in the transfer of dividend, and then we'll look at the RBI's economic capital framework as put forward by the Bimal General Committee's recommendations. After that, we'll come back to solve these 5 prelims-based questions for the practice. Let's understand the background to this particular article first. See, the Reserve Bank of India, being the central bank, it is required to intervene in the economy during certain unforeseen circumstances. Now, for example, if the Indian economy has got itself into recession, obviously the RBI as a central bank would be required to inject more amount of liquidity into the economy. Now, question is, from where can the RBI get this huge amount of money? Now, RBI basically maintains certain amount of reserves. These reserves enable the Reserve Bank of India to fulfill its role as a central bank. So during certain exceptional circumstances, the Reserve Bank of India can use these reserves to inject money into the economy and thus fulfill its role as a central bank. So in the year 2018-19, the total amount of reserves with the Reserve Bank of India, this was approximately rupees 10 lakh crores. Now, the government felt that the Reserve Bank of India is over-capitalized, which means that the Reserve Bank of India is maintaining more amount of reserves than what is actually required. Accordingly, the government asked the Reserve Bank of India to transfer 1/3 of its total reserves. So if you convert 1/3 of rupees 10 lakh crore, this would be approximately 3.33 lakh crore. So basically the government wanted the Reserve Bank of India to transfer 3.33 lakh crores to itself. So basically the government wanted the RBI to transfer 3.33 lakh crores, which then can be used by the government to undertake the recapitalization of public sector banks. But this was opposed by the Reserve Bank of India. The RBI was of an opinion that if it transfers 1/3 of its reserves, then RBI would be undercapitalized. Undercapitalized here means RBI would have less amount of capital to intervene in the market. So in a way, RBI felt that if it transfers more amount of its reserves to the government, RBI would not only be able to fulfill its role as a central bank, but this will also lead to the erosion of RBI's independence as well as autonomy. So basically there was a tussle between the government and the RBI as to whether the RBI should transfer the reserves to the government or not, and how much of these reserves should actually be transferred. Hence, in order to sort out this particular issue, the RBI then appointed a committee under the leadership of Bimal Jalan. Now, this particular committee has already submitted its recommendations. Most of these recommendations have been accepted by the Reserve Bank of India. The second aspect is with respect to transfer of profits. As I said before, Section 47 of the RBI Act stipulates that whatever profits the RBI earns, a certain part of these profits should be transferred to the government in the form of dividend. Since the year 2014, the Reserve Bank of India has been transferring 100% of its profits to the government. More importantly, in the year 2019-20, the Reserve Bank of India had transferred a record amount of rupees 1.23 lakh crores. And as we can see now, the RBI has transferred rupees 99,000 crores. So basically, as an aspirant preparing for civil service examination, you should be aware as to what are the various sources of profits for the Reserve Bank of India. So let's get into these aspects and try to understand these aspects one by one. Starting with the assets with the Reserve Bank of India. See, the RBI maintains certain assets. In the year 2018-19, the total value of assets with the RBI was rupees 33 lakh crores. These assets with the RBI are basically maintained in different forms. These include foreign currency assets, gold, government securities, loans to the center and states, and loans to the banks. So all of these constitutes the assets with the Reserve Bank of India. On the other hand, if you look at currency in circulation, that means the currency notes which are printed by the Reserve Bank of India and put into circulation, these currency in circulation, they do not constitute the assets. Rather, they constitute the liabilities of the Reserve Bank of India. Similarly, when the banks keep the CRR deposits, that is cash reserve ratio deposits with the RBI, this money which the banks are keeping with the RBI, this is not the RBI's money. Rather, this is the money of the banks which they are keeping with the RBI. So even the CRR deposits will also be the liabilities. Similarly, both the central government as well as state government maintain certain deposits with the Reserve Bank of India. So even these deposits are considered to be the liabilities. Anyways, coming back to the assets. In the year 2018-19, the total assets of the RBI, as I said, was rupees 33 lakh crores. And as you can see, from each of these assets, the RBI can earn profits. Now, for example, the foreign currency assets, they are maintained in the form of dollar, euro, pound, yen, yuan, etc. So whenever there is an increase in the value of these foreign currency assets, automatically this will lead to increase in the profits with the Reserve Bank of India. Similarly, if there is appreciation in the value of gold, even then this can be considered as profits. On the government securities, the RBI would earn interest. The RBI would also earn interest on the loans that it gives to the center, state as well as banks. So all of these interest income can also be considered as the profits with the Reserve Bank of India. So as you can see, in the year 2016-17, it registered a profits of 60,000 crores. In the year 2018-19, it registered a profit of 1.23 lakh crore. And according to the latest data what we have, RBI has now registered a total profits of rupees 99,000 crores. Out of these profits which the RBI earns, RBI will use certain amount of money to meet its own expenses. Some of these expenses would include the salaries which it pays to the employees, maintenance related charges, also the expenses on printing of currency notes. All of these are considered to be the expenses incurred by the Reserve Bank of India. After incurring these expenses, whatever is the money left, that is the net profits, that net profits is transferred to the reserves. After transferring certain part of net profits to the reserves, the remaining net profits are in turn transferred in the form of dividend to the government of India. So here the question was, how much of reserves should the RBI basically maintain with itself? See, over a period of time, the RBI, through the transfer of net profits, RBI had built up a total stock of reserves worth rupees 10 lakh crores. And as you can see here, the total assets of the RBI was 33 lakh crores. So if you convert these reserves in terms of assets, this would be approximately 28.92% of its total assets. If you look at the central banks in the other countries, usually the central banks in other countries maintain only 14% of their assets in the form of reserves. But if you see the total reserves of the RBI, this was almost 28% of its assets. So the government felt that RBI is over capitalized. That is why the government asked the RBI to transfer at least one third of its reserves. But RBI was against the transfer of reserves because RBI felt that if it transfers more amount of its reserves to the government, RBI would not be able to fulfill its role as a central bank. So with respect to how much of reserves should the RBI maintain, two committees were appointed before. One was Usha Thorat Committee in the year 2004. According to this particular committee, the total reserves of the RBI should be at least 18% of its total assets. But as you can see, RBI was maintaining 28% of its assets in the form of reserves. Second one was more important, and this was the Malegaon Committee, which gave its recommendations in the year 2014. See, basically, Malegaon Committee stated that whatever reserves which the Reserve Bank of India has built, this is sufficient enough. So, the Malegaon Committee felt that the reserves with the RBI worth rupees 10 lakh crore, this is sufficient enough. Since it is sufficient enough, the Reserve Bank of India should not transfer its net profits to the reserves. Instead, whatever net profits the RBI earns, the entire net profits or 100% of its net profits should be transferred in the form of dividend to the government of India. So, as you can see here, from the year 2014, the Reserve Bank of India is not transferring any of its profits to the reserves. Instead, 100% of its profits it is transferring in the form of dividend to the government of India. So, as you can see, for this financial year, the RBI has recorded a profit of 99,000 crores. So, this entire profit of 99,000 crores has now been transferred in the form of dividend to the government of India. This profit has not been used by the RBI in order to build up its reserves. So coming back to the tussle between the government and the RBI over how much of reserve should be maintained. See, basically RBI was of an opinion that whatever profits which we are earning, that is 100% of our profits, we are already transferring it to the government in the form of dividend. In spite of that, the government was still demanding for transfer of one third of its reserves, which RBI was not particularly happy. Hence, in order to solve this particular tussle between the RBI and the government, the Bimal General Committee was appointed. So, Bimal General Committee has basically given recommendations about the economic capital framework. So, basically, economic capital framework tells us as to how much of reserves should the RBI maintain with itself and how much of reserves should it transfer to the government of India. It also tells us as to how much of profits or what part of profits should be transferred from the RBI to the government. So let's understand the recommendations of the Bimal General Committee. So before getting into these recommendations, let us understand the economic capital framework from a perspective of a layman. Then we'll extend the same logic to the Reserve Bank of India. Now let's say you as a person, you are earning income from basically two sources. Let's say you're earning money in the form of rent. And second is you're earning money through your investment in gold. Now, whatever money which you are earning in the form of rent, that money comes directly into your bank account. So, this money you can use it as and when you want it. So, this money which you are getting from your rent can be considered as your realized profit. Why it is called as realized? Because you are able to get this into your bank account and you can use this profit whenever you would want to. But just consider a case wherein you have made an investment in gold. Let's say in the year 2019, you bought 1 gram of gold at say rupees 3,000. In next year, let's say in the year 2020, the value of 1 gram of gold in the market, this has increased to rupees 4,000. So whatever investment you have made in gold here, on this investment, you have registered a profit of rupees 1,000. But the question is, can this be considered as realized profit? No, this cannot be considered as realized profit. This is so because you will not be able to realize this rupees 1,000 unless you sell the gold. That is why we call this as unrealized profit. So you as an individual, you can earn profits which can be in the form of realized profits or unrealized profits. Similarly, when you look at RBI, even RBI earns profits, and these profits can either be realized profits or the unrealized profits. Now, for example, the profits which the RBI earns on interest to the loans which it gives to the banks, interest on government securities, interest on loans to the state governments, and so on, all of these can be considered as realized profits. But when the RBI is registering profits due to appreciation in the foreign currency or due to appreciation in the value of gold, this profit is not a realized profit. Rather, this is an unrealized profit. In a way, this profits remains only on paper. Unless the RBI sells of the foreign currency or unless the RBI sells of the gold, RBI will not be able to realize these profits. That is why these profits are considered to be as notional profits. So, according to Bimal General Committee, the logic was very simple. Whatever is a realized profits, only that realized profits can be transferred. Whereas unrealized profits obviously cannot be transferred simply because they are notional profits or these profits remain only on paper. So basically, according to Bimal General Committee, RBI's economic capital framework comprises of two components. One is realized equity and the second one is revaluation reserves. Realized equity is a source of realized profits. Revaluation reserves is a source of unrealized profits. So Bimal General Committee basically recommended that the total realized equity should be in the range of 5.5% to 6.5% of its total assets. So if this realized equity increases to more than 6.5% of its total assets, then only it has to be transferred to the government. If the total realized equity is between 5.5 to 6, then there is no need for the RBI to transfer its reserves to the central government. As far as revaluation reserves is concerned, this should be in the range of 15.3 to 18.9% of its total assets. See, these facts and figures are not actually important from the perspective of your prelims examination. There is no need for you to mug them up. But what is important is only the realized equity is transferable, whereas the revaluation reserves are not transferable. So when Bimal General Committee gave its recommendations, these recommendations were accepted. Upon the acceptance of these recommendations, the Reserve Bank of India calculated as to what is its total realized equity, and that time it was 6.8% of its total assets. So as you can see, this should be in the range of 5.5 to 6.5. So it was in excess by 0.3%. So because of which the Reserve Bank of India then decided to transfer almost around rupees 50,000 crores from its reserves to the government. So basically look at the government's demand. Government was demanding for 1/3 of its total reserves, that is 3.33 lakh crores. But ultimately, based upon the recommendations of the Bimal General Committee, 50,000 crores got transferred from the RBI to the government. So these are some of the important aspects which you should know with respect to RBI's economic capital framework. Let us now solve some of the prelims based questions for the practice. Coming to practice MCQ number 1, I've already discussed this. I hope you should be in a position to give me a correct answer. Please respond in the comment section with the correct answer. Practice question number 2. The question here is, the RBI Act mandates that the profits made by the RBI should be transferred to the center in the form of dividend every year, which as I discussed is correct. The adoption of expansionary monetary policy usually leads to increase in the profits of the Reserve Bank of India. See, what happens during the expansionary monetary policy is the Reserve Bank of India injects money into the economy. In order to inject money, the RBI may adopt multiple policies. Now, for example, the RBI may go for open market operations. Through the open market operations, the RBI may purchase more amount of government securities in order to inject liquidity. So, during the expansionary monetary policy, the total amount of government securities in the custody of the Reserve Bank of India, this increases. So, as the RBI buys more amount of government securities, obviously, the RBI would be able to earn more of interest income. Secondly, in order to inject money, the Reserve Bank of India would be giving more amount of loans to the banks. So when it gives more amount of loans to the banks, obviously on these loans, the Reserve Bank of India would be able to earn more amount of interest income. So usually when the RBI is following expansionary monetary policy, there is increase in the profits of the RBI. So the right answer to this particular question is both 1 and 2. As far as practice MCQ number 3 is concerned, I hope I have already discussed this. You can respond to the comment section with the right answer. Now coming to practice MCQ 4, which among the following could lead to increase in the profits of the Reserve Bank of India? I have already explained this. I hope you should be able to find out the right answer. Now coming to practice MCQ number 5. See, earlier the Reserve Bank of India used to follow the financial year, which used to start from July 1st and end on June 30. Whereas the government as well as banks used to follow the financial year, which used to start from April 1st and end on March 31st. See, last year, the Reserve Bank of India decided to align its financial year with that of the financial year of the government as well as banks. So for the present financial year 21-22, the RBI's accounting year has started from April 1st, 2021 and it will end on March 31st, 2022, which means that the RBI's accounting year has got aligned with the accounting year of the Government of India. So based upon this change in the accounting year, you have this particular question. Recently, RBI decided to change its accounting year to April-March. In this regard, consider the following statements. The accounting year to be followed by the RBI has been provided under the RBI Act 1934. No. The accounting year which is to be followed by the Reserve Bank of India, this is as per the convention which is followed. It is not mentioned under the RBI Act. The new change in the accounting year is based upon the recommendations of Urjit Patel Committee. This change is not based upon the Urjit Patel Committee. Rather, this change is based upon the Bimal General Committee's recommendations on economic capital framework. So the right answer here would be D, neither one nor two. With this, let us now take up the next article. The next article appears on page number 14. This particular article talks about the sovereign gold bonds which are issued by the Reserve Bank of India on behalf of the central government. Now, this particular topic of sovereign gold bonds becomes important both from the perspective of the prelims examination as well as the mains examination. As you can see in prelims 2016, we had a direct question related to the sovereign gold bond scheme and the gold monetization scheme. Similarly, in mains 2015, we had a direct question which required the students to analyze the merits of the gold monetization scheme. Hence, as far as the sovereign gold bond scheme is concerned, from the perspective of the prelims examination, one should be aware about what exactly are the sovereign gold bonds, how do they work, and their advantages. As far as the mains examination is concerned, one should be in a position to carry out a critical analysis of the sovereign gold bonds. That is, understand both pros as well as cons of sovereign gold bond. So what we'll do here is, as part of this particular discussion, we will discuss about all the aspects about the sovereign gold bonds, such as what, why, how, the benefits and challenges of the sovereign gold bonds, and so on. After that, we'll come back to solve these two prelims-based questions for the practice. Further, based upon a video discussion, a mains question for your practice here could be, even though being well-intentioned, the sovereign gold bond scheme has failed to achieve its desired objectives. Comment. So let's understand as to what exactly are the sovereign gold bonds and how they are different from the normal government bonds. See, when you buy a normal government bond, let's say its face value is equal to rupees 100, rate of interest is 10%, and the maturity period is equal to 5 years. It means that you as an investor, you would be entitled to get an interest for a period of 5 years. So in this particular case, it would be 10% of rupees 100. That is, you would be getting rupees 10 as an interest on an annual basis. So this into 5, that is for a period of 5 years, the total interest income which you will be earning in this particular case would be rupees 50. And once the bond matures, you'll be getting an amount which is equal to the principal amount, that is rupees 100. So if you look at your net returns, You have invested total 100 rupees, but in return you are getting back 150. So your net returns in this particular case would be rupees 50. Now when you look at the sovereign gold bonds, the sovereign gold bonds are simply the government securities which are denominated in terms of gold. So as you can see, the face value of the sovereign gold bond is not denominated in terms of rupees or cash. Rather, it is denominated in terms of gold. So let's say the face value of this sovereign gold bond is say 1 gram. And let's say the RBI decides to sell the sovereign gold bond worth 1 gram at rupees 3000. Which means you as an investor, you would be investing 3000 rupees in the sovereign gold bond. The rate of interest on the sovereign gold bond is 2.5%. So in this particular case, you as an investor, you would be entitled to get an interest on an annual basis. So here, if you calculate the interest amount, it would be 2.5% into 3000 rupees. So in this case, you would be getting an interest income of rupees 75 on an annual basis. So if you multiply into 8, that is the maturity period, the total interest amount which you would get is rupees 600. So every year rupees 75 as an interest income would get deposited into your account, and the total amount of interest which you would get is rupees 600. Now once the sovereign gold bond matures after a period of 8 years, you would be able to redeem this sovereign gold bond in terms of cash based upon the prevailing market price. Please understand here that the sovereign gold bonds cannot be redeemed in terms of gold, which means after the period of 8 years, you cannot ask the Reserve Bank of India to give you 1 gram gold. Rather, what you can do here is you can ask RBI to give you cash which is equivalent to the market value of 1 gram of gold. Now, for example, after a period of 8 years, let's say the value of 1 gram of gold has increased to rupees 4000. So in this case, you will be getting back rupees 4000. So please look here. Initially, you have made an investment of rupees 3000, but after the maturity period of 8 years, you are getting back rupees 4000. Why? Because the gold value here has appreciated. So apart from the interest of rupees 600, you are also getting rupees 1000 extra because the gold value has appreciated. But at the same time, you must understand that in some of the cases, the value of 1 gram of gold after a period of 8 years can also decline. Even though this is quite rare, but this is still a possibility. Now, for example, after a period of 8 years, the value of 1 gram of gold can reduce to rupees 2500. So in this case, you will be getting back only rupees 2500. So in this case, you will be making a loss of rupees 500. So basically, based upon what is the prevailing market price after a period of 8 years, you would be able to redeem the bond in terms of cash. Please understand here that it cannot be redeemed in terms of gold. It has to be redeemed only in terms of cash. Now, all the investors who invest in sovereign gold bond, they believe that the gold prices would keep on increasing. Then that is why they invest in the sovereign gold bonds. So coming back to our discussion here. So first and foremost, why there is a need for the sovereign gold bonds. If you look at the annual gold production in India, this is hardly around 1.6 tons. However, because of Indians' penchant for gold, the annual import of gold into the Indian economy, this is almost 1000 times higher. This is approximately 900 to 950 tons. Total annual import of gold into India is approximately around 35 to 40 billion dollars. So the higher import of gold is leading to a negative impact on our trade deficit as well as balance of payment. That is why the government decided to issue the sovereign gold bonds in the year 2015. So as discussed before, the sovereign gold bonds can be considered as the substitutes for holding the physical gold. According to the guidelines laid down by the Reserve Bank of India, the minimum investment in the sovereign gold bond has to be 1 gram. Maximum investment for individuals, it is 4 kg. For trust, it is 20 kg. The rate of interest is 2.5% per annum. Maturity period is 8 years. And these bonds can be sold through the branches of various categories of scheduled banks, that is nationalized banks, private banks, foreign banks, designated post offices, and so on. So some of the benefits associated with the sovereign gold bonds include this scheme has a potential to reduce the import of gold. The risk and storage cost normally associated with the physical gold is completely eliminated in this particular case. The investors are assured of the market value of gold upon maturity, and it is expected that since the gold prices keep on increasing, the investors would make profits. And lastly, see the physical gold which you buy, normally you would be required to pay the making charges when you convert the physical gold into jewelry. But when you buy a sovereign gold bond, they are completely free from any kind of making charges. However, in spite of these benefits associated with the sovereign gold bonds, the sovereign gold bond scheme has not been very successful. This is on account of multiple reasons. Obviously, first and foremost reason is lack of awareness among the Indians. Second is a higher cultural affinity of the Indians towards the physical gold, which in turn is leading to the lower demand for the sovereign gold bonds. Nextly, most of the Indians buy the physical gold because they feel that the physical gold is a status symbol. Whereas if they buy a sovereign gold bond, they will not be able to flaunt it. So this is one of the reasons as to why Indians do not buy more of sovereign gold bonds and they end up buying more of physical gold. And lastly, if you have to invest in sovereign gold bonds, you need a demat account, which most of the Indians do not have. So these are some of the important aspects which one should know with respect to sovereign gold bonds. Now coming to the prelims based question for the practice, the question here is, which among the following are the benefits of the sovereign gold bonds? First one, flexibility to the investors to redeem the bond either in cash or in gold upon maturity. This is completely wrong because the investors can redeem the bond only in terms of cash. Reduce the gold imports into India. Yes. Option to the investors to sell the sovereign gold bonds in the stock exchanges. Yes. Investors are allowed to sell the sovereign gold bonds in the stock exchanges. So the right answer to this particular question would be B. That is 2 and 3 only. As far as practice MCQ number 7 is concerned, this MCQ is about hallmarking in India. With respect to this particular practice question, I would want all of you to find out the correct answer to this particular question and respond in the comments section. With this, let us now take up the next article. The next article appears on page number 6, that is the editorial page. The article is titled as "The Fight Against the AIDS Offer a COVID-19 Vaccine Patent Pathway." See, we all know that the patents which have been issued on the vaccines, medicines, etc. to deal with COVID-19 pandemic can act as a significant hindrance to ensure affordable and equitable healthcare access for all. Hence, in order to make these vaccines and medicines affordable to the global community, all the countries, including India, have basically three options. All of these three options have already been discussed in our previous DNS videos. For example, first and foremost, we can go for the issuance of compulsory license, which is one of the flexibility provided under the TRIPS agreement. Second one is we can go for a temporary waiver on patents. In fact, this has been the demand put forth by India as well as South Africa before the World Trade Organization, and presently it is under negotiation. The third option is to promote more of voluntary licensing between the pharmaceutical companies. So in case of voluntary licensing, a company which has a patent can enter into licensing agreement with other pharma company, wherein this company which has a patent can transfer the technology as well as know-how in order to manufacture the vaccines, medicines, etc. dealing with the COVID-19. So whatever profits the pharmaceutical companies would earn, a certain percentage of that profit they would be paying to the patented holder in the form of royalty. Now, for example, as discussed in our DNS dated 7th of May 2021, presently the US-based company Gilead has got the patent to manufacture the remdesivir injection. Now, if you promote for the voluntary licensing in this particular case, Gilead would then enter into the voluntary licensing agreement with a number of Indian pharmaceutical companies. By doing so, the Indian pharmaceutical companies would get the technology as well as the knowledge to manufacture the remdesivir from the Gilead company. these Indian pharmaceutical companies would be able to manufacture remdesivir and sell it in the Indian domestic market. A certain percentage of their profits they would be paying to the Gilead in the form of royalty. So on one hand, the company which has the patent gets benefited in the form of the payment for royalty. On the other hand, we would be able to significantly ramp up the production and bring down the prices of vaccines and medicines, and hence make them affordable for the global community. In fact, the proposal of voluntary licensing has already been put forth by the Director General of World Trade Organization. In order to facilitate this voluntary licensing, the World Health Organization has created a kind of platform known as the COVID-19 Technology Access Pool. So this pool facilitates the patent holders to share their technology as well as knowledge with the other pharma companies. So using this technology and knowledge, the other pharmaceutical companies will be able to manufacture the COVID-19 related vaccines, medicines, etc. However, this particular article here highlights that so far no patented holder has joined the COVID-19 Technology Access Pool. So since the patented holders as such are reluctant to go for the voluntary licensing, countries such as India as well as South Africa have asked for a temporary waiver on patents. So basically, going forward, what we have to do is we would have to encourage more number of global pharmaceutical companies to enter into the voluntary licensing agreements, particularly with the pharmaceutical companies based in India. And by doing so, we would be able to increase the production and bring down the prices on vaccines, medicines, etc. So this is what this article is basically highlighting. Now these aspects we have discussed in our DNS dated 7th of May 2021. So you can go through this particular DNS in much greater detail to understand all of these aspects. Next on page number 11, you have an article which highlights about the agriculture system which is practiced in the Koraput district of Odisha. Way back in the year 2012, the agriculture system which is practiced in the Koraput district of Odisha was given the status of the globally important agriculture heritage system. Hence, from the perspective of the prelims examination, you must basically understand as to what exactly is a globally important agriculture heritage system, who declares such sites, and the list of such important sites in India. So let's understand as to what exactly is a globally important agriculture heritage system. See, in the modern day, the agriculture sector has become highly input intensive. Farmers across the world are using more of inputs such as water, fertilizers, insecticides, and so on. So this has not only led to loss of agricultural biodiversity, but at the same time, this has also led to a decline in the income levels of the farmers. In spite of these rapid developments which have taken place across the world, even today, there are certain agricultural practices in certain pockets of the world where even today, traditional agricultural practices are followed by using indigenous technology as well as knowledge. So in a way, these agricultural systems have been able to promote nature-friendly practices. These agricultural practices, on one hand, they have been able to protect the agricultural biodiversity, they have been able to protect the biological diversity, and at the same time, they have been able to support the livelihoods of a large number of poor farmers. Hence, we need to recognize such agricultural sites. We need to document the agricultural practices which have been followed in such sites, so that once these practices are documented, these practices as such can be promoted at the global level. It is precisely behind this particular backdrop, the Food and Agricultural Organization came up with the idea of recognizing some of the sites as globally important agricultural heritage system. This idea was initially proposed by the Food and Agriculture Organization on the occasion of the World Summit on Sustainable Development in the year 2002. So if you look at what actually constitutes a globally important agriculture heritage system, It is basically an outstanding landscape of aesthetic beauty, which on one hand is able to promote agricultural biodiversity. It is considered to be more resilient ecosystem, which means it is able to withstand the impact of climate change, and at the same time it has proved to be a valuable cultural heritage. So the main objective of declaring such sites is to recognize agricultural systems where even today nature-friendly agricultural practices have been followed with minimum harm to the environment, recognize those agricultural systems and practices which have been able to support economic livelihoods, and at the same time provide highest level of protection to the biodiversity, and to document indigenous agricultural practices and to promote these practices at the global level. The Food and Agricultural Organization as such has not come out with an explicit criteria for identification of such sites, but based upon the sites which have been so far recognized by FAO, we can come up with the implicit criteria. Usually those sites which have the highest level of biodiversity, that is both agricultural biodiversity as well as biological diversity, are chosen. These are the sites where even today nature-friendly indigenous practices are followed, and these sites are able to support the livelihoods of a large number of small and marginal farmers who are generally poor. So once these sites are recognized as globally important agriculture heritage system, a multi-pronged strategy is adopted at the global level, national level as well as local level. At a global level, we are recognizing these sites. At a national level, we are encouraging the countries to promote such agricultural systems and practices in other pockets of the country, and also integrate such systems and practices into their agricultural policies. And at the local level, we are trying to support the livelihoods of the people by ensuring the sustainable development of such agriculture heritage systems. As far as India is concerned, in case of India, totally 3 sites have been recognized. The first one is obviously the Koraput traditional agriculture system in Odisha. Second one is Kuttanad below sea level farming system. And the third one is the Pampore region in Kashmir, which is famous for the cultivation of saffron. See, the important details about the agricultural systems and practices followed in these sites have been incorporated in the PDF. I am very sure that you'd be able to go through these things and understand on your own. With this, let us now take up the next article. Next, on page number 4, you have an article which is titled as 80 of Odisha's tribal group test positive. This particular article highlights about the growing number of COVID positive cases among the Dongaria Kond tribe, which is one of the particularly vulnerable tribal groups from the state of Odisha. See, as far as your prelims examination is concerned, you should basically understand various facets related to the PVTGs. And as you can see here, already a question has been asked in the prelims 2019. So from the perspective of the prelims examination, you must basically understand about the constitutional provisions for declaring a particular community as the scheduled tribe, the criteria adopted by the government to designate a particular community as scheduled tribe, and on what basis a particular scheduled tribe community is declared as a particularly vulnerable tribal group community, the problems faced by PVTGs, and important government policies and initiatives for their welfare. Now, all of these important prelims related aspects related to PVTGs I have already covered in the DNS dated 22nd November 2020. So since this particular article has already been discussed in much greater detail, I will not be repeating this article once again. The next article appears on page number 6 in the form of an editorial. The article is titled as The Fitful Approach. This article has appeared in the newspaper in the context of the recent notice issued by the central government to the WhatsApp company to withdraw its latest privacy updates. So basically, earlier, a WhatsApp user had a choice whether to share his data with a third-party entities such as Facebook. So only when the user authorized or empowered the WhatsApp to share his data with a third-party entities such as Facebook, only then WhatsApp could do so. But now WhatsApp has come up with a new privacy update. According to the new privacy update, compulsory the WhatsApp's users generated data would be shared with the third-party entities such as Facebook. So now WhatsApp is not asking your prior permission to share your data with the third-party entities such as Facebook. So in case if you want to stop WhatsApp from sharing your data with the third-party entities, the only option left with you is to quit WhatsApp. Because of such a privacy update, users in India started migrating to the other messaging platforms such as Signal, Telegram, and so on. So this has created a lot of backlash in India. A number of policy experts have pointed out that the new privacy update of WhatsApp would go against the right to privacy of individuals. It violates the right to choose of the individuals. So because of this particular reasons, the central government has recently issued a notice to the WhatsApp company to withdraw its latest privacy updates. In this regard, this particular article basically highlights that before acting against the WhatsApp company, the Indian government must first put in place the data protection laws. Now, all of these aspects related to the controversy related to the WhatsApp privacy updates has already been covered by Navid sir in the DNS dated 17 Jan 2021. So those of you who would want to know more about the controversy created because of the WhatsApp privacy update, I suggest you to go through this particular DNS dated 17 Jan 2021. The link to this particular DNS has been provided in the description box below for your reference. With this, we have come to the end of today's discussion. Now the answer to the question that was asked in yesterday's DNS is option C.